Uh, Hello, everyone. Been away for a while. So, what I've done, I've just written a book, shameless plug, the Textus Receptus, the malign texts, and this is an extract from the book in terms of early readings. All right. So, basically, one of the arguments against the Byzantine tradition and majority text manuscripts, but especially with Textus Receptus, is that they used late manuscripts. And one of the fallacies of modern textual criticism is that late manuscripts does not mean a late reading. So I'm going to look at two particular unique readings, all right, which sort of demonstrate that late manuscripts or manuscripts are written in the 11th century, 12th, 13th century, which are used by the Erasmus and those early compilers of the Textus Receptus, that they contained early readings. So we're going to look at two specific examples, all right? So uh, we're going to look at Romans 13, all right, 13 verse 9. Uh, and it says, "For this thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal." And this is the variant, "Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not covet, and if there be any commandments briefly complained in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." So the variant reading is "Thou shalt not bear false witness." So if you look in terms of any modern version, um, they will not find this phrase, "Thou shalt not bear false witness." Unless this is found in Codex Siniaticus of the 4th century, Codex P, 9th century, Codex Vaticanus Graecus, 2061, which is a 5th century, right? So what is this reading is supported by Codex Siniaticus. Now we know that the Codex Siniaticus wasn't, when I say discovered, it wasn't made public until Tischendorf discovered it in St. Catherine's Monastery. So we know that the compilers of the Textus Receptus did not have access to the manuscript Codex Sinaiticus itself. We know that Codex Sinaiticus is actually in the British Library now. Remember, the first time I saw it was actually in the British Museum, it was actually in the British Library now, and it's the oldest virtually complete codex. But we know that they didn't have access to this, so it wasn't discovered about 200 years afterwards. So let's look at this. All right. So we look at the ESV, English Standard Version, which is the arguably the best English translation of the modern critical text. And you notice the word "thou shalt not bear false witness" is actually found here. So here we have Erasmus First Edition. Now, if you come to the third line from the bottom, and the second word in, that's the word "false witness." Yeah. So Erasmus First Edition of Romans, with Romans 13 verse 9. So if you go up from the bottom, third line, and the second and third word in is the word "not" bear false witness. Okay, so this is Erasmus First Edition, yeah, 1519. So we can see it there. So it's clear that he had access to manuscripts which preserve readings that were earlier. So let's have a look. Let's carry on. All right. So what we see here, this is taken directly from, so you look at the first line there, and the bold writing is "not bear false witness." This is taken directly from Codex Siniaticus online. So if you go to basically uh, the British Library has digitized Codex Siniaticus, so you can go, anybody can go in there and they can check the readings there, and also they have one that's in terms of the writing, you can copy and look in. So you could actually check that for yourself. So if you go to Codex Siniaticus online by the British Library, you can actually see it there. So you see a comparison that they preserve a reading Codex Siniaticus. So even though the compilers of the Textus did not have access to this manuscript, they had access to reading of Codex Siniaticus. All right. So you see here that there. Now, my favorite variant um, used to be John 7, verse 8. It was still John 7, verse 8. But what we're going to look at is John 19, verse 28. It's a very, very interesting variant. And John 19, verse 28 said, after this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that scripture might feel saith, I thirst. Yeah. So we see here in terms of the Textus Receptus, but we notice here the majority text. Now, this is where, and I said I have to quote Maurice Robinson, that the Textus Receptus agrees 98.5% of the time with the Robinson peer point. And generally, the Textus Receptus agrees with the majority of manuscripts. But here it seems to depart. So we notice in the majority text, it used the word seeing. After this, Jesus seeing that all things had been fulfilled. So the scripture might be fulfilled, he said, I thirst. And this is the majority text, yeah? So eidos, right, which is knowing, and eidon, which is seeing. So we see here the Byzantine text says eidon, which means seeing, and eidos, which means knowing. So basically, but this is why it becomes really interesting. Not only is it interesting that actually a reading, an early reading, which departs from the majority text, where generally the text agrees with the majority text or the Byzantine text. We see here it departs. So let's look at something else here. So notice here, this is Erasmus' first edition, right? Now his first edition, and if you look at 3 lines up, 4 words in, we see that reading, yeah, Edon, yeah. Okay, let's go back. Let's see that. So when Erasmus did his first edition, he agreed with the majority text. So his first edition with the majority text. So let's look at as he goes on in the 1535 edition. Now, if you look, now it's not very clear, but this is his last edition, all right? And we see here the lineup, third word in, he changes it, all right? So a little more clear here, go back, is that he changed the eidos, yeah? So in his first edition, he agrees with the majority text. His last edition, he changes from the majority text to an earlier reading. Okay. So you see there, so second line from the bottom, third word in, he changes it to agree with Codex Siniaticus. Now here's another interesting thing here, right? So just to sum up, yeah, this between his first edition, his last edition. The first edition said seeing, the change it to agree with Codex Siniaticus, which is knowing. Yeah, that's an interesting point. So one of the misconceptions is that the TR based purely on late manuscripts, but equating late manuscripts meant late reading, which is not the case. I've demonstrated, proved that a late manuscript does not mean a late reading. We see here that a late manuscript served a very early reading. So one of the things I really want to bring out here, so he changed from the majority to the Codex Siniaticus. All right. So we see here Codex Siniaticus online, and what you will notice, which is very interesting, which is unusual, because the reading in the Textus Receptus agrees in order, exact same order, that particular verse, as Codex Siniaticus, even though the compilers of the Textus Receptus did not have access to Codex Siniaticus. It wasn't made public till 200 years later. Now, those who know about Greek, word order is not an issue. So, for example, I'm going to give an example off the top of my head, but in terms of with Greek, word order is not necessarily a big thing. Yeah. So, but here we find the verse itself as a whole. The reading of the text agrees exactly the same word order as the Ordine Codex Siniaticus. Yeah. So we see here that Erasmus departed from the majority text and he came into contact with an early reading, an early reading in the exact same word order as found in Codex Siniaticus. And here we've got comparator. So if you look at the bottom, you've got the King James, and then you look at O1, and in your own time, you can actually see the word order there for yourself, yeah? All right? You can see that for yourself. So you look at O1, which is Codex Siniaticus, and then you look at the bottom, page 8, the Textus Receptus, yeah? And also, just to throw in some more, you also find that it agrees with Stephanus as well, yeah? So Stephanus and the TR in terms of later the TR. So you see the exact same word as Codex Siniaticus. So I think that's an interesting point there. And so summary, the fallacy that late manuscripts means late readings, which is clearly not true. Even though the compiler for Textus did not have access to Codex Siniaticus, it did have readings found in Codex Siniaticus. The variant from the first edition changed from majority to an earlier minority reading. So I hope it's short and brief, and so I hope you enjoyed that, and feel free to comment, and shameless plug again. There's a lot of stuff about that in the book I've written, a nice short book, so you should knock that out in a day, okay? And I'll be continuing to do talks, and the next one will be looking at how the Westcott and Hort Greek New Testament overthrew the Textus Receptus and also the Nestle's land. Okay? God bless you, keep you, and make cause face to shine upon you.